This is arguably the biggest change in the last 30 years and very well could be the end of the buy-to-let era. I'm of course talking about the Renters Reform Bill, and it's been a long time coming. The Conservative Party brought this to attention in the 2019 manifesto, and it really is quite a dramatic change in a lot of ways. So here's what's coming up for it and what it means to you. So just to give you a bit of background, this is all about creating what is known as the fairer rental sector. So it's about equalizing the relationship between landlord and renter, and for a lot of people, maybe not you watching this, maybe you, I don't know, it's gonna be a big difference, but it could provide the best opportunity we've seen in a long time. So a few of the proposals included doubling the notice period of increasing rents, the abolishment of Section 21, a new ombudsman covering private rental sector, making all tenancies periodic, making sure there's a new property portal, improving the rights of tenants, and not allowing landlords to make blanket statements like not renting to families, and a few other things. So is everything coming into play from that? No. Here are the main ones we need to look out for. So number one is that Section 21 is going to be abolished. So Section 21 is issued at the end of a fixed tenancy to remove a tenant. What this essentially means is that you will only be able to remove a tenant under reasonable circumstances. And I think that's really important because in my mind, I'm like, why is that such a big deal? I'll go through the pros and cons in a moment, but ultimately reasonable circumstances might be you need to go live in the property. That would be reasonable to remove a tenant for you to go move into a property you own. Reasonable circumstance. They're not paying the rent and you want to evict them. Reasonable circumstance. Or you are selling the property. Reasonable circumstance. Or another one is it is deemed unfit for somebody to live there and you need to remove the tenant in order to go in and do works. Reasonable circumstance. Essentially what it stops is landlords going, well, actually I want you out of the property. I don't like you, or there's no real reasonable situation of why you're asking them to leave in the first place. Next is some changes to Section 8 notices. And Section 8 is one of the most powerful notices that there is, but actually there's some for and against maybe landlords and renters here. So the first one is that you can issue a Section 8 as a mandatory eviction, not optional, mandatory eviction if a tenant has been 2 months or more in arrears at least 3 times in the last 3 years for whatever reason that they give. So they can't go, oh, I lost my job or this happened in the industry or whatever. If they've been in 2 months arrears at least 3 times in there. So for example, if they're 2 months in arrears but they catch up and then next month they go back into 2 months a year, that's number 2. And the third, you can issue Section 8 for mandatory eviction. There's also going to be a new clause put in for Section 8 for landlords that want to sell their property or indeed move into the property with their own family. Again, that will be cause for mandatory eviction. Next, they've increased the notice period for arrears to 4 weeks so that the 2-month arrears can be carried out in court. And finally, if there's criminal behavior at the property, including antisocial behavior, and this has been proven, this will be grounds for a Section 8 eviction also. So you might be thinking, none of this really jumps out to me as good or bad, and I've got my own opinion on this and I'll give that in a second, but it all ties into what they're also doing with court proceedings. So there's a lot of things that really slow court proceedings. So for example, a tenant can currently game the system. So if they're 1 month in arrears, you can call a court date, goes all the way to the court date, and then they can pay up and then it's cancelled the court date. And then they can go in arrears again, and they know how to game the system because all they need to do is call charities such as Shelter that will guide them through how to do this. Okay, and that will be stopped. Things like paperwork, unnecessary paperwork, court dates, not being able to open up a court date for up to 6 months, all of that's going to be scrapped. So all of these things so far, honestly, I believe there's a lot of landlords who go, oh my God, this is crazy, I should have this right. and they're going to sell up their properties. But for me, I think this is great. I think it actually makes it fair and reasonable for the renter, so they can't just get kicked out if they're paying on time and there's no other external reason. I also think it's great as a landlord because ultimately, hey, you don't want to pay me, no problem whatsoever. But now's time to get out of this, and we're going to speed up that process and evict the tenant. The other two things around tenancies is periodic tenancy. So every single one will be a periodic tenancy now, not a fixed contract. So for example, there won't be 12-month ASTs anymore. They will be able to give 2-month notice. You will be able to give 2 months notice with reason to evict them. Now, again, some people will be bothered by that. For me personally, I genuinely just don't care. It's very rare in my experience that a tenant is moving their entire home into your house and then wants to move out 6 months later. And on the odd chance that does happen, so what? That's just a tiny little thing. It's incredibly rare. Most tenants that are moving want to stay there for a minimum a year or even longer. The other one is rental increases. So you used to be able to do a rental increase, well, really as soon as they're outside a contract. However, the new change will be that you can do a rental increase once a year. Now, on the one hand, and it has to be justified. You can't just go, I'm putting it up 50 quid. It has to be in line with demand and things like that. It has to be justified. Again, that's fairly logical to me, and if anything, it's better. Most landlords do not actually increase their rent that often, and I actually think it will standardize the process that at the end of each 12-month period, the rent will go up 50 quid, for example, and I think that's really reasonable and actually better for both the renter and the landlord. The final two things is the decent home standard will be introduced to the private rental sector, which again, this actually stands in the social housing sector or not, and being blunt about it, social housing is absolute shit. So I think as a private landlord, if you're not upholding the decent home standard already, then you shouldn't be a landlord. You're probably a slum landlord. No offense if that's one of you. And so bringing that standard to the 4.4 million homes that's privately rented in the UK, bring it on, not a problem. And then finally, there's a property ombudsman that's going to be created specifically for private rental landlords so that there is a mediator, and they will force landlords to either apologise, rectify, or pay up to £25,000 in fees for screwing up as a landlord and providing a substandard home because of that decent home standard. So what's my thoughts on this overall? I think it's great. I might be one of the only landlords that thinks this is an amazing thing. Will it cause some ruckus with old school landlords? Yeah, and good. Like, why shouldn't we be providing great houses for people to make it their home? I'm not against that. What I do love is it actually does make it better for tenants, good tenants. And this is the thing. I think this genuinely makes it better for good tenants. Tenants that want to make it their home, people that want to pay on time, people that expect to have a certain standard of living. I think that's completely reasonable, and to have more security about what they're paying so the landlord can't just suddenly whack it up £200 for no reason. And for landlords, good landlords, I think it's going to be great for us too, because you're providing a great home. They report an issue, no worries, we'll go fix it if it's in line with that. If you've caused a damage, you're in arrears, you're antisocial, you're being criminal, then we as landlords can get them out faster. No longer will they be able to game the system. Now, what I'm interested in, this is coming in on the 8th of May, so I'm interested to actually read the details, because the one I am nervous about is the ombudsman with that potential £25,000 fine. I'm not particularly worried about it. We have to be part of the ombudsman with our letting agency, our education company as part of an ombudsman, and of course the property company. So, and I genuinely never had the ombudsman be unreasonable. And I've been on both sides, by the way, on the tenant side when I've taken on rent to SA properties, and as an owner side, a business owner side, never found them unreasonable. Who's it gonna hurt? I think it's going to hurt people at the bottom of the heap. I think it's going to really hurt shit landlords that are providing shit properties, and I really think it's going to hurt arsehole renters. And I think that's the thing with the industry. A lot of people hate landlords, but there's some really great landlords that genuinely want to make money whilst providing a home for somebody. I think there's also shit landlords that just care about the money and don't care about the property. They're going to be fucked. They really are. Or they're going to have to uphold their standard. And the same with tenants. Some landlords hate hate tenants, but the truth is there's some great tenants and they will be rewarded through this if they've got a shit landlord, and then shit tenants are really going to be penalized. So if you're a good landlord with a bad tenant, it's good for the landlord and bad for the tenant. If you've got a good tenant and a bad landlord, it's going to be bad for the landlord. But hey, that's just my opinion and my initial view. Once I've read through the full white papers, I'll do another video breaking down each bit and how I think it will impact you. But overall, I think this is great news for landlords like you and me. But let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think about the changes? What do you think is going to come up? What thoughts have you had about it? What do you think about this video? If you're new to this channel and you want to learn more about property, and if you're thinking, actually, I'm an old school landlord, I want to learn the new ways of doing things, then make sure to hit the subscribe and the notification bell. If you did get value, it really does help me out. Just taking 2 seconds of your time and hitting that like button. Hopefully you got value, and I'll see you in the next video.